Now to go over the abnormalities and distortions of Season 1. That's story mode, the mirror dungeons, and also the refraction line. Abnormalities. The eldritch horrors that have great benefits for those able to utilize them, and also great dangers. There are some new abnormalities that have appeared, but some will be aberrations of the abnormalities within Lobotomy Corporation's HQ, or the library as it has become. Aberrations which are mostly weaker than the originals, with some exceptions. The aberrations being located in the branch facilities, as if they're not good enough for the main HQ. Only 2 of these were seen, as per the Wonderlab comic, but Limbus Company revealed others, and what has become of each of them. As of Chapter 3.5, 3 branch facilities were discovered. 1 was derelict and abandoned, home to wing remnants and abnormalities that made the survivors systematically kill each other to delay their own demise. 1 was used to make indentured slaves work to make spaces for vaults under the casino that it was built under. Or rather, the casino was built on top of the branch facility. And the other was repurposed for an organization that's a mix of the Inquisition and the Ku Klux Klan that has a strong hatred towards those with prosthetics or cybernetic body parts. Ooh, if they encountered the Cybermen, they'd be on full zealous fury on them, hammering the nails into them quicker than you can say, delete. I'll go over the ones with reports in chronological order, so from Chapter 1 until the refraction line. As for what the letters in each of the IDs mean, F is for fairy tale, as in the twisted takes on them. T is for trauma, as in representing a trauma of some kind. Original, as in something original? I'm not sure about that one. And donor, that likely means something that donates something or expects to be donated to. Let us start with the Ebony Queen's apple. F-04-03-04. This is an aberration of Snow White's apple. F-04-42. A WA abnormality. Apparently, this was the apple that the evil queen used to make Snow White fall asleep after she took a bite out of it. After all of what happened, the apple was abandoned, and eventually it made a body for itself to find her own prints. When it breached, it made vines that both damaged and slowed those that walked through them to get to this abnormality. According to one source, the Ebony Queen's apple is based on the evil queen who made the apple that was intended to poison Snow White, and has similar attacks to the original, but different. Now, if this abnormality was weaker than the original, it's not by a lot. Faust was in charge of writing the report on this abnormality, which involved recording information gained from encountering it, as per Company Rules, Article 11, Paragraph 2. She noted that when first facing it, it showed no signs of hostility, initiating direct communication through the psyche, using the commonly spoken language of hers, where it told her, although not through any physical means, to bring Snow White. This suggested that it had a connection to Snow White's apple. she discovered a corpse from the operations planning department and left the scene before a battle could break out. She then recorded the information gained from encountering the battle sometime after. Company Rules Article 11 Paragraph 3 required that she designated its risk level. It was WA. She used the same managerial procedures that the branch facility would. Then she described its combat behavior. It attacks them using its vines, wrapping them around itself, forming a dress shape to make it appear noble. The vines stabbing and rising from the floor to injure multiple combatants. It was also difficult to damage. It was possible to remove the arms, which prevented it from attacking using a method that needed that arm. As for removing the head, which was discovered when Heathcliff went full berserker on it, at the cost of his own head, which was a temporary setback for Limbus Company, as Dante could rewind that. It was still able to attack, but it was far less durable, which made the removal of limbs much easier. Although the head could grow back, but removing the limbs freed them from the threat of powerful attacks. Faust was basically and methodically describing how the fight against the Ebony Queen's apple worked, how destroying the limbs reduced its combat effectiveness, how destroying the fruit temporarily inflicted fragile. What wasn't mentioned is that the vines needed to be removed as they slowed down the damned dozen, or at the very least those that were fighting it anyway. This was done by an event where it mentioned that a heart torn into thousands of pieces must be kept from all eyes, lest it burrowed into the ground and tangled itself. Yet someone had to pull up those thorny roots, as there's no wounds that can remain unearthed. The damned dozen understood that to be coiled in piercing sharp pain was something to avoid, even in one's dreams. Those that are wrathful are more likely to pass this check. Whoever was sent, they would need to dig up the roots with their bare hands. While the injury may heal, distrust may take deep root in their hearts. The roots were retracted and they were able to move more freely. Destroying the head is not so bad with a plant, as plants have the reproduction occur at the top, and the brain was at the bottom. As for how Faust did her report, is it just me, or does she have the German stereotype of being strongly adhering to procedures? Well, it certainly keeps those that read it well informed. Next we have the Doomsday Calendar. Now this is a new one, a high-level abnormality. M-04-04-05. This was the first to have the M letter code, likely standing for myth or mythology. It's patterned on the solar calendar used by the Aztecs, although this was also used by other Mesoamerican cultures, at least before the Spanish arrived, and we know how that ended. As for what the Doomsday part of it was based on the end of that calendar in relatively modern times, being feared to be the end of the world on December 21st, 2012, which was such a popular phenomenon that they made a disaster movie out of it, and it was also the threat that was foreshadowed in some of the Assassin's Creed games. It also has the assistance of minions in the form of clay dolls, and like many Mesoamerican cultures, it demanded blood sacrifices. As for how this is fought, to begin with, the Doomsday Calendar is dormant, and some clay dolls are sent to attack the combatants. But once they're killed, it wakes up, grows arms, fleshy as they are, to pound the combatants, while summoning more clay dolls, where it looked upset and wanted to express that displeasure, wanting something, but it was unclear what to give. The sinners would need to choose their targets wisely, choosing the abnormality in order to destroy the limbs or killing the clay dolls. There were ways to calm this abnormality down, but this abnormality liked gifts the most. A fresh batch of blood might appease it. Yes, a blood sacrifice. Either a suppressed clay doll or one of the sinners will do, if it was fresh enough. It would calm the abnormality temporarily, weakening its attacks and damaging it. After some damage is sustained, the abnormality expands its disc and all around them burn. Even the clay dolls are capable of doing more than making the sinners bleed. They can inflict burn as well. Yes. Burn! The heat wears them down, but after a time, they must decide on their next move. They will need to make another offering to calm its wrath. To weaken the flame, cool water was needed, but no buckets of water or any means of putting out fire was there, so offering up someone cool would be needed instead. Whichever was offered, the flames died out, and the abnormality was damaged further. After more damage was sustained, the disc opened up once again, and the center glowed purple. A devastating attack was charging up, as a dangerous glow was sensed. And if the sinners didn't take it down, it would destroy the clay dolls, and then the stars were twinkling. When they shone, sight was robbed. What gifts would the stars like? The one offered up to the abnormality. Their lullaby would bring the stars into a deep slumber, their starlight leaving them for a time. This would kill the sinner offered up, a temporary setback, but it would also hit everyone's sanity hard, and if they failed, they'd be subject to the same devastating attack as the clay dolls. As for this report, it was Yi Sang's turn to write on this abnormality. He observed that it was placed on a wooden pedestal. It seemed to be woven from muscle fibers, and it was described as a massive stone plate. As he approached it, it rattled as he got closer. He received strong discouragement from the others and backed away. He saw it as a tool for predicting a date of some kind. He could see the letters in the bricks. Faust agreed with him, seeing it as from an ancient language. When he engaged it in combat, which was less pleasant than as an observer to see it sustain damage, he discovered its behaviors in battle, where it summoned flesh dolls wearing stone masks made of the same materials as stone plates. Offering the dolls allowed him to observe a change in its shape, The bricks were rattling and widened, seeing the red muscle fibers and strange spatial extensions, making it more ominous, despite not knowing how drastic the change would be. Heathcliff complained why he was sacrificed instead of the masked blokes. Then what he said was censored, due to it having a lot of profanity, enough to require correction tape, like the threats of physical violence too obscene for an official report. Faust believed that Dante made the right choice, as the clay dolls couldn't be offered when they were still alive. The only other option was to sacrifice one of the sinners. Heathcliff complaining why it had to be him, requiring more correction tape for the rest of what he said. Well, it's probably because you're an hole that threatened them with physical violence, and this was Dante punishing you in a subtle way. Then Yi Sang spoke of his own experience of being offered. It was disconcerting, wet, and an abnormal experience. He stepped forward. He had no fear of death, as that would be temporary. He didn't feel pain. He felt like he was transported to another location, a dimension pocket. His senses useless there. He witnessed the end, the doomsday, feeling like he was non-existent, witnessing everything torn into thousands of pieces. Correction tape was used to censor the rest, as it was likely too graphic for this report. Faust adding that she had him with the recovery team from the after team, where the psychological corruption seemed rather severe, telling Dante that they should refrain from making observers directly experience this from now on. Next we have the Golden Apple. O-02-04-06. A He-level abnormality that the damned dozen had to fight in order to get to the Golden Bar, although it was also called the Golden False Apple or the False Apple or the Maggoty Apple. It was likely patterned on a number of sources, such as that Greek myth involving the strife goddess Eris dropping a golden apple at a wedding, which started an argument between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. That led to the Trojan War. Yes, that one. The one involving that huge wooden horse. In Irish mythology, they were owned by Manannan Macir. Sorry if I've butchered the pronunciation. That was an Irish sea deity and otherworld guardian, and these were musical bells, not fruits. In Norse mythology, they were associated with Idun, which maintained the youth of the one that ate them. One such apple led to a 6-year pregnancy and a caesarean section of a king's wife. As for how this was fought, it started as a giant golden apple with limbs that can take quite a few beatings, but eventually the apple cracks, with enough pummeling from the sinners, and its true form was revealed. As the apple's body broke, the raging fruit grew. In the main story, Yuri, a Lobotomy Corporation remnant, wanted to check it out. Regardless of whether or not the selected sinner passed that check, Yuri was consumed by the abnormality as a head and limbs sprouted out of the fruits. The sinners had to damage it quicker than it could replenish it. And as it was subdued, the maggoty head, as in the head made of maggots, was replaced by Yuri's. Gregor was sent to dispatch her, but he hesitated as to what the abnormality would have been capable of if allowed to change completely. We might never know. Gregor was the one to write this observation log. Last time he did anything like this was when he was a kid. And this was either before he was taken by the old G-Corp or during his time in its army. As for the description, it was an apple with huge grotesque limbs, asking if it freaks you out when a food item is massive or walks on its own. It's golden, not from your average orchard. So there are orchards in existence. Well, they need to grow fresh fruits somewhere. Certainly for those around the nest. An apple abnormality strutting all by itself. He had an urge to chop that apple, almost magnetic, likely based on his mental conditioning imposed on him by Herman, which resulted in a hatred of apples. Ooh, in that case he'd best avoid cider, as he'd probably hate that as well. They decided to fall back as there was too little intel to try and fight this, knowing that they'd need to take it on eventually, deciding to write down more when they do. Limbus criticized his disorganized report, asking if it was this terrible during his military service. Gregor saying that Virgilius told him that he could write this how he wanted, and Dante agreed with this. Limbus, the ever-present suck-up, deferred to Dante's judgment. Ryosho then left a cigarette mark and said, SPC. Gregor, seeing this as a petty complaint. SPC probably meaning something along the lines of some pathetic. When he wrote about the battle, he complained that it kept healing. It wouldn't fall after they sliced, tore, smashed, and did all kinds of damage to it. Fighting it was simple, although it did do a body slam, but that wasn't hard to deal with. It had a golden aura floating around it, but it was gone after the apple recovered too many times. There were limits to its regeneration. Dante needing to know that as it might help. In a report written after that, he had to scribble out foul words condemning himself for being put in charge of the observation, angry at himself despite not knowing it could happen. None of them could, as this was their first time. When the golden apple's blown up, it split open, and then some foul words were scribbled out, and then branches popped out of its crack. It took Yuri, which resulted in a swarm of maggots metamorphosing into a hideous face. Despite feeling a kinship with that, as they're both pests, he couldn't stay calm. He had to tear that apart to find peace. Then he couldn't write anymore, so Faust had to complete it, saying that he didn't have much else to offer in terms of information. Ryosho complaining that the maggots squirmed harder than she expected when she scorched them with her death stick, asking if that could be counted as intel. I doubt it, unless you have something more incendiary than that, as it'll take more than a death stick to deal with those. We continue this with Have You Become Strong? T-04-10-06. This TEF level abnormality is an aberration of You Must Be Happy. T-09-04, which was a Zayin abnormality, which makes this one stronger than the original. Now, You Must Be Happy was a capsule-like machine with a screen saying either yes or no, which switched constantly, with the speed increasing as time progressed. If it said yes, then it boosted the stats of the agent that used it for the rest of the day. If it said no, it would reduce the stats of that agent, and the longer it took for the user of this to wait until stopping the machine to determine which that was, the greater the benefit and drawback, depending on which it happens. Although, if they're buffed or debuffed too much, or use it too many times, more than 4 times in the same day, it kills them, as there is only so much that human physiology can withstand, at least without augmentations. This was an answer to a question asking, do you love your city? Either rewarding or punishing, depending on whether it's yes or no. This was a tool abnormality. As for the aberration, it makes crude-looking and colourful cyborgs from humans being put through it, but who they were was lost as a consequence, as their speech patterns showed no hint of what they were before. This abnormality wasn't fought directly. It was the cyborgs that were fought, which are become strong genuinely, grown powerful for realsies, and the larger one, you want to get beat heartily, each capable of self-repair when sustaining critical damage. This will continue until the sinners defeat the larger one twice, and then they ask, why do they keep coming back? Perhaps they're not alive. That way death isn't possible. This wasn't the time to get philosophical. One even compared it to dealing with a brick wall. Then another noticed that something was going on from a factory, based on the noises from it. Clanks of steel were heard from it. They decided to look into it, but they needed to deal with the cyborgs to give them time to do so, which required them to incapacitate the larger one. They then decided to defeat the larger one in order to head to the factory without being distracted by them, doing so by pinning it down. It looked like a toy factory. They saw a control panel with several buttons attached to it. It asked, do you love the city you live in? If no is selected, it said, incorrect input, you must become strong. Please input your answer again. If no is selected again, despite the warning that pressing that button 3 times will cause the facility to shut down, it repeated this warning. Then, when no was selected 3 times, it operated emergency protocol 3, factory shutdown. This made the factory stop, and this removed the self-repair capability, and made the cyborgs more vulnerable to attack, allowing for their destruction. And that's what the sinners did when they exited the factory. Destroyed them. Ishmael wrote this report, seeing the creeps walking out of the container box with tin cans on their heads, torsos made up of plastic, like they were put together from random toys with mismatching colours, and some even lacking frames to cover up mechanisms. They were all machines. Although she saw bits of flesh and dried blood. Sink there theorizing that it's an automated prosthetic procedure device, and then remembered that his father considered buying a company regarding that, which was... Then he stopped there. Faust told him that abnormalities weren't real devices, recommending against trying to make ties with existing things. Ishmael considered them tougher than they look, deceptively looking like children's toys. She thought that she saw her share of extraordinary things throughout her career of unpleasant jobs, like the after being forced out of her life on water, but they acted like broken killing machines. Their upper bodies rotated all the way around. Their arms moved weirdly. They were incapable of feeling pain. Like some surgeries in the back streets offer, asking if this was similar. Faust reminded her not to make such comparisons. Ishmael argued back that abnormalities physically exist in this realm. If properties of a thing are determined by the laws of the space that it exists in, can it truly be said to exist? Heathcliff didn't know what she was talking about. Ishmael didn't see it as necessary for him to understand. Heathcliff was surprised that his name was written on the report. Ryoshu found it funny, as she left another death stick mark on this report. Later on, she reported that she had an idea. She heard mechanical noises as she approached the cyborgs, noting that they're equipped with devices that automatically repair their bodies, but it can't carry out more than 5 repairs, and it makes them stronger each time they're fixed up. She understood that the repair mechanism needed to be stopped. She questioned how the organic components were repaired, and Faust then told her to not question the physics of abnormalities. Ah yes. Much as there are a limited amount of buffs/debuffs that an agent can withstand with "you must be happy," this abnormality has a limited amount of self-repairs before they can be self-repaired no more. The pink shoes, F-04-10-13, is a TEF level abnormality that's an aberration of red shoes, 0-04-08, a hit level abnormality, which turns the wearer into the wearer of the shoes, into a homicidal maniac. The Red Shoes is based on a story written by Hans Christian Andersen, the same author as The Little Mermaid, who wore the said red shoes to church, which was improper, which resulted in an old soldier telling her shoes to never come off when she dances, which after her adoptive mother's death, and the fact that she'd rather go dancing than go to her funeral, she couldn't stop dancing. An angel condemning her to dance even after she dies as a warning to vain children. In the end, she had an executioner chop off her feet. This was apparently based on his half-sister that he loathed. Another aberration of this is the penitent girl, which possesses those with low temperance, but instead of chopping off other people's feet, the victim chops off their own feet. I'm guessing that they're not covered for prosthetic replacement feet. The Pink Shoes is based on a South Korean take on this tale, involving the said pink shoes that are cursed to give the owner a strong obsession that leads to envy and greed, plaguing the owner with nightmarish visions. In the end, they would die with their feet chopped off. They were a gift from a male dancer to the daughter of a high-ranking Japanese officer. A rival wanted the shoes for herself, and this daughter, who was pregnant, witnessed her lover cheating on her, which he regretted. And seeing this, the rival murdered her, and she wanted vengeance from beyond the grave on both of them. The shoes needed to be returned to their owner, as in placed on their grave. This abnormality, the aberration, known as the pink shoes, wraps pink ribbons around its hosts, in this case, cyborgs, and fills them with desire. As for how combat works against these, this battle consists of fighting cyborgs, with these ribbons wrapped around them, and they're stronger because of this, and can fill others with desire if attacked by them, much to their detriment. With the larger cyborg, the wearer of the pink shoes, when this is defeated, the pink shoes extends ribbons, which comes with a voice that travels between them, asking what is their desire to put them on. They'll carry them wherever they wish to go. These were suspicious suggestions, but for some reason they were struggling to decide what to do. Refusing to wear them undoes the knots of desire, although their heads were pounding. And it was just getting good. The ribbons scattered and melted away. The voice shouted, "Freedom! Fairness!" The sinners needed to recover regardless, and this weakened those that remained, and made them fragile, which made it easier to destroy them. There are 2 reports on this abnormality, Miss Salt writing one of them, describing them as composed of machinery, tin, plastic, steel, and circuits, red or pink ribbons coiled around their bodies, a pair of pink shoes worn around the parts thought to be feet, the feet forcibly shoved into the pink shoes. Anomalies observed in the color and direction of the pupils in all entities. We'll write about the new discoveries in a future report. And Gregor thought this to be awfully dry. Later, he observed the pink ribbons encroaching on them with prolonged exposure. If they were covered in a large quantity, they'd be subject to heavily damaging attacks. Those killed by those wearing pink ribbons were reanimated. This happened after a certain number of casualties, requesting that Dante analyze the incidents and determine the tactical approach, and will note new discoveries in their future reports. He has little doubt that this tin entity and those covered in ribbons shared the same state, suggesting that the ribbons be removed before it poses serious danger, speaking from personal experience when he came into contact with a ribbon, which didn't have the texture of cloth or any kind of fabric. Some resembled withered leaves, while others had the tactile impression of a strong plant stem. He saw the ribbons as alive. They reacted to being removed, forcefully, and this made them crumble more easily. This concluded his side of it. It was unclear who said the next part, but they got into a panic and ripped them haphazardly. But it wasn't that tricky. Sinclair was careful about it, as it might go wrong, but it expanded and wrapped around Honglu because of him. Honglu thought it to be a unique and fun experience. Yeah, he would say that. Even though it risked costing him his mind and also his life, although the latter, that's not as bad considering that Dante is still around. As for Honglu's reports, he saw writing as tedious work, although he didn't see it as a bad idea to write down his experiences, even though he hated when his grandfather scolded and pestered him into keeping a diary. He's not as adverse to that idea as he was previously. He described the appearance of the abnormality. The eyes were out of focus. It was drooling from the mouth. The colour of the eyes and the saliva was pink, like the ribbons wrapped around their bodies. It resembled silk to him, remembering that his family kept a similar colour of fabric, although the fabric that he was seeing wasn't as luxurious. They used something like it for a celebration of his younger sibling's birthday. Then he noticed that they were corpses of Lobotomy Corporation employees based on their outfits and employee IDs, feeling uneasy about looting corpses. He'd have previously ordered a servant to handle the task and looked away at the sight and have the servant explain it with words, not normally having any interest in dead bodies in the first place, asking if they were animated by those ribbons, the ones that grabbed them as they were fought. If they wrapped around them when they die, he asked if he became like them. Now we move on to Baba Yaga. F-05-10-18. The minions might be TEF level, but this abnormality might possibly be LF level, based on its size alone. I mean, it's the size of a kaiju! The first that's this large. It could probably give White Knight a run for its money, and that's the most powerful abnormality so far. One that's destroyed a wing that generated power by tapping into hell. As for Baba Yaga, the main reason why the head doesn't intervene with this is because it's contained in this cavern, and it's not posing a threat to the general populace of District 10, so they basically said, it's not causing the city any problems, leave it there. It makes you wonder if there are any other Godzilla-sized abnormalities. They're likely to be pretty rare and likely evicted into the outskirts, as they'd be too dangerous to be in the city, and not something that the head would be willing to ignore. As for what this is based on, it's based on Slavic folklore, a witch that lives in the woods that can either help or hinder those that enter them, depending on her mood. She is known to catch and eat those that do. In the worst case scenario, that's children. She lived in a hut that stood on chicken legs. Now this abnormality is similar to that of the Snow Queen, F-01-37, a He-level abnormality that traps people in ice and lives in a snow palace. But it's unlikely to be an aberration of this. All we see of the abnormality is a bird's legs and its frozen bird-legged minions that are force that stand in the way of the damned dozens escape into a small cavern that Baba Yaga can't follow. Radia wrote this report. She observed the others, including Gregor making one with a grumpy face, annoyed that Virgilius and Faust not telling them how to do this. She observed the minions of this abnormality as wielders of pickaxes like the indentured miners previously encountered, but with spikes of ice here and there. She saw bigger on those that slept outside in her hometown in District 25. Ooh, yeah. That would be noticeable, considering how unkind that place is. And that is considering the city itself in general. They have chicken legs, which doesn't make sense to her. The large pickaxe turned into a big icy scythe, like the Grim Reaper. Massive and sharp, although it was still wielded like a pickaxe, mining their skulls instead of ore veins, where instead of gold or silver, they yielded blood. Then she noticed Sinclair's head blow up. Faust then concluded that Dante restored him later. Next we have the Anyway Watchdog. O-02-11-26. A He-level abnormality that's loosely based on Cerberus, the three-headed watchdog that guards the gates of the underworld to prevent the dead from leaving, which is implied to not be in control of itself. It could be based around animal experimentation, specifically the kind that uses electric shocks. Yi-Sang described his impressions of the encounter with this abnormality in his reports. He started with describing an appearance of 3 dark-furred wolves stitched together in a delicate operation, possibly more as there are more than 3 mouths. Atop the canine heads was the figure of a person, charred beyond recognition, although combustion of that degree would normally reduce that figure to ashes. A solid form with muscle showing motion. He saw a heap of wooden telephone poles lodged into its body as stakes would a prisoner. They periodically emitted electricity with no clear means of doing so. When he engaged it in combat, it ran at him, galloping in a possessed motion. A far cry from the hound commanded to battle or a beast yearning to feed itself. The purple arc of electricity sprinting across its back reminded him of animals tested under similar conditions in a lab. If that's NCorp you're speaking of, their cruelty is worse than I thought. The electrical stimuli made the move as others intended. He felt pity for this abnormality despite the claws hurting him greatly. He noted that it had a thunderous roar where it gathered bolts of lightning as if all the storms and thunders of the world struck at once. A roar that has a thunderous property. The source of the electricity was the abnormality, a living battery that used the lightning in its body to fuel itself. It wasn't for a self-motivated purpose. The electrical forces dictated its motion. The will of the sky was what it followed. Faust gave her usual reminder that it's not right to have such impressions of abnormalities. Let's move on to the headless Ichthys. O-02-10-11. A He-level abnormality that is somehow able to attack despite not having a head. Apparently it's based on the Ichthys, a fish symbol used by early Christians. Likely a reference to the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This was a secret symbol to show that they were followers of Christ. The word itself was a Greek anacronym that translated to Jesus Christ, Son of God. It caused bleed in combat along with rupture and can make a target fragile with slaps of its tail, which can be broken in combat and stays broken for the remainder of the fight. It also has a powerful attack that sprays something red on the target, inflicting a lot of bleed if the coin hit heads. Messon wrote this report, where he noted that it had the appearance of a fish with the head cut off, the surface cut clean, done as if it was carried out by a single-sided edge, such as a knife or a scythe. It exhibited motion despite not having a head. Then again, having a head was completely irrelevant to its ability to show activity. An inflatable sack was visible around the chest area, but he couldn't make a clear observation. In a later report, he observed a silhouette inside the inflated sack around the chest. It resembled a flower or the central nervous system of a human. It expanded the sack to use as a blunt instrument and can squeeze it out at high speed to expel liquid. The sack was deemed to be a major component of its attacks. Quick destruction of it should prove effective. I shall cover the rest in part 2 of this. Until next time. Hail the rabbits!